It's an afternoon of music from Vienna as the Concord Chamber Music Society welcomes back acclaimed violinist Axel Strauss for a wonderful program of works by Schubert, Berg, and Mozart, Sunday, November 18th at 3 p.m. at the Concord Academy Performing Arts Center. The program begins with Schubert's String Trio in B-flat, his only completed work in the genre. Written in 1817 when the composer was 20 years old, this piece reveals an interesting stylistic dichotomy in Schubert's early output. Whereas the songs he was writing in abundance exhibited the expressive freedom and harmonic adventurism associated with musical romanticism, his early ensemble compositions were dominated by an 18th century sensibility and strictly followed models established by Haydn and Mozart. Although Beethoven had radically transformed instrumental composition by the time Schubert wrote this trio, the younger composer viewed these developments with ambivalence, referring to them as eccentricities. In purely human terms, such an attitude was understandable. Whereas Schubert was born, lived and worked in obscurity, and died in Vienna, Beethoven was the dominant creative force in the Austrian capital for all but the final year of Schubert's tragically brief life. It would be another 5 years before he would fully assimilate Beethoven's Germanic constructivism with the Viennese form of Italianate lyricism that was such a fundamental component of his creative identity, a synthesis that produced the large-scale instrumental works of his final years that established his legacy as a composer of ensemble music. Nonetheless, this B-flat string trio, like Schubert's beloved Symphony No. 5 in the same key written the previous year, is infused with elements of harmonic color that compellingly foretell the expressive vocabulary of his mature style. The next work on the program was also written by a Viennese native. Alban Berg's Opus 3 string quartet was composed in 1910 and was the final piece he wrote while studying with the founder of the so-called Second Viennese School, Arnold Schoenberg. Although this quartet is atonal, in that it lacks a key or tonal center, it is not a product of the 12-tone method of composition associated with Schoenberg and his circle, which was more than a decade away from being codified. Dedicated to his future wife Helena, this quartet displays a level of creative assurance that is unusual in such an early work. The unique combination of traditional and radical elements that would characterize Berg's music and win him an audience well before other composers connected to the Second Viennese School is evident throughout. Although references to conventional harmonic formulas are all but entirely absent, Berg's typically passionate lyricism, which is so reminiscent of the music of his Romantic-era predecessors, is a constant presence. The quartet is filled with elements that masters such as Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven considered fundamental, such as the interconnection and development of identifiable melodic and motivic material, the employment of sonata form structures, and the use of musical rhetoric to articulate and emphasize a work's architecture. Although Berg was an inexperienced 25-year-old composer when he wrote this quartet, the technical mastery and expressive power that so thoroughly informed this piece show that he was already a musician who knew exactly what he wanted to say and how he wished to say it. The program closes with a performance of the first of the 6 celebrated string quartets Mozart dedicated to Franz Joseph Haydn, his string quartet in G major, Köchel No. 387. Despite the popular image of Mozart's genius as fully developed in childhood, even a cursory examination of his output reveals a continual expansion of his ability and artistic reach. In fact, it was only after his move to Vienna in June of 1781 that Mozart reached his full maturity as a composer, consistently producing works that have become essential components of the Western musical canon. Although he'd already written 13 quartets by the time he began composing this quartet in G major in late 1782, the substance and breadth of this work and the 5 that followed far surpass Mozart's earlier essays in the genre. The determinative influence of his much deeper acquaintance with Haydn's quartets manifests itself in the weightier structures, the more equalized distribution of the musical material among the 4 instruments, the more complex polyphonic textures, the depth of lyrical sentiment, and the spirit of witty experimentation that are such defining characteristics of these pieces. It was after Haydn heard the entire set at Mozart's home in early 1785 that he made the oft-quoted remark to Leopold Mozart that so succinctly captured the significance of his young colleague's gifts. "Before God and as an honest man, I tell you that your son is the greatest composer known to me either in person or by name. He has taste and, what is more, the most profound knowledge of composition." We hope you'll join us on Sunday, November 18th at 3 p.m. at the Concord Academy Performing Arts Center as violinist Axel Strauss joins members of the Concord Chamber Music Society for an enlivening afternoon of music from Vienna.